For a preface, you should know that Gazans experienced more than 1,300 violations in the first 100 days of this ceasefire. And yet, you have indirect violations nowadays, though they are rare. One such example of those is the case of this journalist who was shot by the clan named Dormosh that is allegedly tied to the apartheid state. This isn't the same as the popular forces, who are almost guaranteed to be a puppet of the apartheid state, but it's not unlikely that their terrorism funding in Gaza goes to Dormosh as well. I wanted to show you this one piece of news here that shows the apartheid state detaining, searching, and beating a Gazan fisherman while bragging about it online. The rules on fishing are in fact still not back to their apartheid and occupation levels that existed pre-gen. I'll cover more violations in a topical manner throughout the video instead of in this overview. The thing is, no matter how many I mention, I don't think I can demonstrate a decent sample of these violations. So let me wrap this overview with the biggest form of violation and some forgotten news on it. The biggest form of violations now is actually the occupation of land through the use of the yellow line. And here's an example article about it. There are patterns to it actually. One such pattern is that it started at about 55% of Gaza, and now it got up to 63% by Xmas Eve. And the thing is, the 92% of unusable homes in September really get to 100% when the attackers decide to imprison or shoot you if you cross an invisible barrier beyond it. And here's a newer version of this same OSHA report. You can see the rates rising up, of course. And also, if you are wondering why the kids and women are being targeted, well, that's because they're being accused of digging tunnels for Hamas only, and not any other armed resistance. There is no discrimination at the wall. We'll scale back the discussions on violations for now in favor of talking about the figureheads or major political developments that were also missed, to my limited understanding. For a start, Tony Blair, one of my favorite characters in this story, had contact with Netanyahu before the ceasefire was announced. We also have this guy who thinks black people shouldn't be allowed to vote in America, and so he became the ambassador to a black nation. We also have this Paige Schill who was working in the Swiss Federal Police and now moved to a private firm of her master's. She worked on arresting the CEO of this news organization, hence why they have a beef with her. But to hone in on a big bad guy, here we have Michael Eisenberg, the guy who co-created the GHF war crimes. He was appointed as Netanyahu's representative in the CMCC, which to put it simply means he's going to be the person who makes his master's wishes on the day-to-day life of Gazans come true. Yes, GHF 2.0 is potentially coming, and no one talks about that possibility. For the seemingly only evil person with good news, we have Tucker Carlson having visited Palestine by himself. Tucker has a lot more news actually that I'll cover after day 200, such as being arrested in the apartheid state it seems. We also had many updates on Dr. Abu Safiya, chief among them that he is still a hostage. He is sort of an iconic and critical doctor for Gaza that's been slowly getting more and more symbolized as an icon. That aside, he also had protests in his name in some European countries. We had South Africa boosting its coal exports to the apartheid state. And don't quote me on this because it was basic math, but I think the amount of coal that they gave is worth $60 million at the time. And it's actually a massive boost that's like 300% or something. So South Africa is effectively taking the responsibility of literally warming and fueling the blight of this planet while it's committing a genocide. But the big thing I wanted to point out in countries is that Ireland and the EU aren't really stopping their technology collaboration with the apartheid state. This is a long-winded path through technology fairs and EU-level agreements, but the gist of it is that the Europeans, including Ireland, are essentially indirectly buying drone experience from the apartheid state to turn the suffering of Gazans into eco-friendly food. We have new names associated with the Board of Peace being revealed, including Ali Al-Sha'ath as the leader of the technocratic team. Now generally I don't trust anyone who is only Palestinian by name, hint hint, Kat Abu Ghazaleh, to take care of Palestine, and this is no exception. Anyway, in other local major news, there is also still unexploded ordnances dropped by the IOF drones everywhere. Gaza is quite literally still a minefield thanks to those drones. I wanted to also point out that the ecocidal state of Israel seems to attack trees individually when it can help itself. The leader of the popular forces that were discussed before the group that has ties to both ISIS and the apartheid state of Israel, was killed post-ceasefire. Will suffice with them kidnapping this nurse. She was used as leverage against her hostage father, just to note. And speaking of those masters, we also had them trafficking Gazans into Africa through an EU front. You might remember it from the plane that just randomly showed up in South Africa that got stopped for hours. And this is the article that goes into details about that, as well as the EU front that organized this plane. Speaking of international elements though, the ICJ delayed the submissions of the South Africa v Israel's counter-arguments, and it was delayed to my understanding to the third month of 2026. Let me wrap this up though with the final piece of this category, this massive ban on 38 aid groups from entering Gaza. And I believe there's been more bans since then. And these aren't small ones, by the way. It's aid groups like Doctors Without Borders, War Child, Caritas, and Action Against Hunger. Going to the fifth category though, there's still 9,000 hostages left in the apartheid state's prison as of day 100. Also, did you know that a new study shows 83% of the victims of this genocide were civilians? Yeah, it's not the 60% anymore. But let's focus on the healthcare side, and it turns out that there's been several victims of cancer due to the lack of treatment there. Also, they blocked eye drops from going to blind people in Gaza, while also we had news that the apartheid state is harvesting organs from its hostages. And that's bad news enough, I know, but one thing that you should recognize is that they have actual skin banks for skin they extracted from Palestinians. Food for thought, I guess. Let's go back to the coverage. We had news that the CPJ is in fact not there to protect journalists, and their donors were in fact also Fox News adjacent at the time of the article. The leader of the CPJ is allegedly actively intervening to stop real journalism from coming out whenever she can. Let's take a step back though and see something more complex. This company, Gotham LLC, is part of the ceasefire anyway, actually, and they were bidding for the leadership role in managing the American aid to Gaza. And as you can see from the title, this is basically a scam on Americans by Americans so that the rich there can get 1.7 billion richer. Just basically wait for 6 months till phase 3 comes up in the ceasefire agreement and basically see an embezzlement of 1.7 billion. The CEO of Gotham LLC is the same Josh Groenbaum that's on the Gaza Board of Peace. Another news piece though is that the apartheid state denied entry to education supplies because education is not critical activity for children right now. Yes, they explained it like that. And speaking of education, take a look at this UNESCO report that says 95% of campuses were affected by the war. And that includes of course 95% of their buildings being varying degrees of unsuitable for education, and half of those being completely decimated. Education is being intentionally targeted in Gaza across all age groups, and that is a thing that is called educide or scholasticide. Just keep this in mind for saying things like the educidal state of Israel or ecocidal state of Israel. And going back to the violations real quick, we have one of the few pet surgeons in Gaza killed post-ceasefire. So there go so many pets and animals in Gaza. I think it is qualifying to also call this country a zoocidal state of Israel. But this is the final piece I wanted to talk about. I have no doubt that the rape happened because she demonstrates patterns I recognize. She was part of the Freedom Flotilla, which means that this happened around the same time as the ceasefire start. And what she said about the sexual violence being a consistent torture tool is true. You can tell I'm a furry by now, so I have a bias for protecting animals. Allow me to show you one of the most heinous things any nation has ever done historically. The zoocidal state of Israel uses dogs to rape people. Someone describes it as, quote, they were stripped completely. The soldiers brought dogs that climbed on them, urinated on them, and then one of them raped him by inserting its penis. And the torture kept on before and after, with pepper spray also being used throughout the rapes, which logically means that there were actually 2 animal-related assaults, one being the urine, then pepper spraying, and then the dog rape. A second account confirmed the story as you can see here, and another one describes that they were sprayed by some chemical on them to mark the prisoner for being raped by dogs. This is something that only occurred once in history to my knowledge, with like one dog trainer in Chile doing that, and also as you would expect in Nazi Germany. So this is some new level of heinous that you would never have imagined even. The dogs found in Israel are actually normally imported from Europe, specifically the Netherlands, Germany, Czech and Belgium. So I'll let you decide where they probably got inspired to do this thing. Is it some random lady in Chile or the Nazis? We still got one more category to display though, and it's called the children. Guess what? Gaza is still the worst place to be a child into this day. And you know what else? The UN in its own words has said that 100% of children in Gaza need some form of mental health and psychosocial treatment. That means that their trauma is so severe that they lost the ability to socialize. Like again, it's not some level, but some form of aid. To 100% of the children. And not only that, that doesn't account for all the direct violence and bombings that causes a casualty each day out of them. And not to mention this near famine that is still ongoing that causes acute malnutrition in thousands. And that's of course just the ones that have the privilege of being treated. Let's go through a few stories of children instead. Here's a little girl called Jenna, trying to save the only valuable thing she and her family have left, a tent and a mattress, by working the mud outside in a storm. Let me end this off with a couple pieces of good news. We had news that the apartheid state's brand index is one of the lowest in the quote-unquote developed world. The ecocidal state of Israel is basically falling back in popularity across all economic metrics. In fact, here's them having a massive agricultural struggle. It's almost poetic with all the side words like educide and ecocide. They even refuse to sell products to Gazans in spite of this, so what a shame. This is your proof, folks, that boycotting absolutely works. They stop you with the laws on all fronts because it works. For this last bit, I wanted to show you some headlines that I found that I did not add to this video for the sake of brevity or clarity, or because I deemed them as being circulated enough. My metric for this decision was mainly on how rhetorically effective each headline would be were it known more, or how much it helps those against the apartheid state to convince others to be that way as well. So, hopefully you learned a few things and a few sides that this abhorrent country commits.